Jamal Hayes had been a farmer all his life. His family's land had been passed down for generations, stretching over 150 acres of fertile soil in rural Georgia. Despite decades of hard work, Jamal had always kept a humble lifestyle. His morning started before sunrise, tending to crops and livestock, and ended late at night with the satisfaction of knowing he had earned every drop of sweat on his brow. But the one thing Jamal had always believed in was integrity, both in his work and in his dealings with others. So when the bank manager called him about a loan approval, he felt cautiously optimistic. Jamal had been planning to expand his farm. The past 3 seasons had been prosperous, but he had bigger dreams: modern irrigation systems, new equipment, and enough seed to plant double the acreage. He had painstakingly gathered all the paperwork, profit statements, land deeds, crop yields, and personal savings. He even prepared a detailed plan showing exactly how he would repay the loan. Everything was in order, and his credit was impeccable. So, with a quiet confidence, he stepped into the bank that morning. The bank itself was small but elegant, the kind of place where everyone knew your name and your financial history. It smelled faintly of polished wood and coffee. Jamal approached the front desk, where a receptionist smiled politely. "Good morning, Mr. Hayes. Mr. Whitmore will see you now," she said. Mr. Whitmore, the bank manager, was a man in his early 50s with a meticulously pressed suit and a reputation for arrogance. His office was lined with books, certificates, and expensive knickknacks, all signaling wealth and power. Jamal handed over the neatly organized folder, and Whitmore barely glanced at it. "So, Mr. Hayes, you want a loan," Whitmore said, his tone clipped. "Do you even know what you're asking for?" "Yes, sir," Jamal replied calmly. "I've prepared a full plan for my farm expansion, including repayment projections. I've attached all relevant financial records and collateral documents." Whitmore waved a dismissive hand. "Collateral doesn't mean anything if I don't like you. You understand that, right?" Jamal swallowed hard but kept his composure. He had dealt with condescension before. What he wasn't prepared for was what came next. Whitmore reached for Jamal's folder and, without warning, threw the papers onto the floor. The sheets fluttered like autumn leaves, scattering across the polished wood floor. Jamal froze. The bank manager leaned back in his chair, smirking. "Pick them up," Whitmore barked. Jamal's hands trembled slightly, but he bent down, gathering each paper carefully. He felt every eye in the office on him. A few tellers watched in uncomfortable silence, and the receptionist's lips pressed into a thin line. Jamal wanted to say something, anything, but he held his tongue. Humiliation burned in his chest, but he reminded himself that dignity was more important than anger. "You know," Whitmore continued, "I don't usually approve loans for people like you. This isn't a charity. Farmers aren't exactly the backbone of modern finance, are they?" Jamal looked up, steadying his voice. "I've built my farm from the ground up. Every season has been profitable. I have records that show consistent growth. I'm asking for a chance, not charity." Whitmore laughed, a sharp, condescending sound. "A chance? Let me tell you something about chances. They're for people who play by the rules. And the rules aren't exactly designed for someone like you." Jamal felt his blood pressure rise, but he remained calm. "With all due respect, sir, I've followed the rules. I've provided everything you asked for." Whitmore leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "Rules are flexible, Mr. Hayes. You'll find that out soon enough." Jamal's hands clenched at his sides. He knew the subtle undertone of Whitmore's words. There was no interest in fairness here, only power and prejudice. And yet, Jamal didn't respond with anger. He was tired of being dismissed, but he was even more tired of letting others define his worth. He straightened up and said, "I understand your position, sir. I just ask that you review the documents fairly." Whitmore smirked, reaching for a pen. "Fairly? That's funny. Let's see if you even deserve the loan. Minutes passed, and Whitmore flipped through the papers with exaggerated slowness, humming to himself. Jamal remained standing, hands behind his back, refusing to let humiliation break him. The other employees shifted nervously, sensing that the manager's behavior was crossing a line. Then Whitmore's expression changed. His eyes narrowed as he reached the final page of Jamal's folder. It was the part where Jamal had included a note about federal farm grants, government water rights, and other legal advantages that gave him leverage over certain types of land disputes. Whitmore's fingers trembled slightly as he set the folder down. You actually know how to protect your farm," he stammered, his arrogance replaced with unease. You understand federal codes?" Jamal nodded calmly. "Yes, sir. I've done my research. I respect the law, and I protect my property." Whitmore's smirk faltered. He leaned back, staring at Jamal as if seeing him for the first time. Jamal felt a flicker of satisfaction, but he didn't let it show. He knew the fight wasn't over, but he also knew he had planted a seed, one that could grow into something far bigger than a simple loan approval. The tension in the office was palpable. Whitmore fumbled with his pen, and Jamal finally decided to break the silence. "Sir, I've been a loyal customer for years. I've never missed a payment. I've only ever asked for guidance and support. Today, I came here in good faith, hoping to expand my farm and continue contributing to the community. All I'm asking is for a fair review." Whitmore opened his mouth, but before he could respond, the receptionist cleared her throat. "Mr. Hayes, I think we should step aside for a moment," she said nervously, glancing at the scattered papers on the floor. Jamal looked around. The tellers were avoiding eye contact, clearly uncomfortable. He realized that Whitmore's attitude wasn't just offensive, it was reckless. And in that moment, Jamal understood that something had shifted. Whatever happened next, it wouldn't be business as usual. As he bent down to gather the last of the papers, Jamal felt a quiet resolve settle over him. He had always believed that hard work and integrity would eventually speak louder than arrogance and prejudice. Today, he was about to find out just how true that was. After the humiliating scene in the bank, Jamal returned home, but he couldn't shake the feeling that today would be different. As he walked past the rows of corn and the grazing cows, he replayed every word from the encounter. Whitmore had underestimated him, and that arrogance had created an opening, one that Jamal intended to use. He wasn't going to respond with anger or threats, he was going to respond with knowledge, patience, and strategy. That evening, Jamal sat at his kitchen table with a stack of legal documents, his laptop, and a cup of strong coffee. He began cross-referencing federal farm regulations, water rights, and small business lending laws. Whitmore had mocked him for knowing the law, but Jamal realized that knowledge was his strongest weapon. The federal grants and protections he had mentioned in his loan folder weren't just words, they were enforceable rights. And if Whitmore didn't respect them, the consequences could be severe. Meanwhile, word of the incident had quietly spread through the small town. The tellers who witnessed Whitmore's behavior couldn't stop talking about it. A few called Jamal to ask if he was okay, offering subtle support. Others mentioned that Whitmore had a history of arrogance, but nobody had ever stood up to him, until now. Jamal's resolve strengthened. He wasn't just fighting for a loan anymore, he was fighting against injustice, against a man who had treated him with contempt simply because of the color of his skin. The next morning, Jamal returned to the bank, folder in hand, with a quiet confidence that contrasted sharply with Whitmore's earlier smirk. He asked to see the manager again. Whitmore looked up, surprised. "Back so soon, Mr. Hayes," he said, his tone slightly forced. "Did you reconsider my offer?" Jamal shook his head. "No, sir. I'm here to discuss my loan application. I would appreciate a fair review this time, without any theatrics." Whitmore waved a hand dismissively, but before he could speak further, Jamal calmly laid out the legal provisions regarding farm loans, federal grants, and waterway rights. He spoke with clarity, referencing specific statutes and government codes. Whitmore's face gradually shifted from smirk to disbelief. He tried to interrupt, but Jamal anticipated each objection and answered with facts, figures, and documents to back up every point. The employees in the office began to take notice. Whispers spread like wildfire, and it became clear that Jamal wasn't just defending his loan application, he was exposing Whitmore's incompetence and potential liability. Whitmore, who had thrived on intimidation, suddenly found himself on shaky ground. His hands shook slightly as he flipped through the papers Jamal had provided, and his usual confidence faltered. "Mr. Hayes, this is impressive," Whitmore stammered. "I've never. I mean," he trailed off, clearly struggling to regain control. Jamal remained calm, leaning slightly against the desk. "Sir, I'm not here to embarrass you. I just want what's fair. I've followed every rule, done all the research, and prepared everything you asked for. That's all I expect from this bank, fair treatment." Whitmore's jaw tightened. He looked as though he was about to argue, but the room seemed to close in around him. The tellers watched silently, the receptionist glanced nervously, and Jamal's calm demeanor cast a shadow over the entire office. It was a rare moment when arrogance met accountability, and Whitmore could feel it. Then Jamal did something unexpected. He pulled out a folder labeled "Official Complaint Procedures" and placed it on Whitmore's desk. "I've also documented the incident yesterday," he said. "The throwing of my papers and the remarks made can be considered harassment under federal and state regulations. I don't want this to escalate unnecessarily, but it's my right to file a formal complaint if needed." Whitmore's face turned pale. He opened his mouth to respond, but Jamal continued. "I would prefer we resolve this amicably. Approve the loan based on the merit of my application, or allow me to take it to another branch. Either way, I will not be treated unfairly or disrespected." For the first time, the office fell silent. Whitmore was unaccustomed to being challenged, especially with such calm authority. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting to the witnesses around the room. He realized that any further aggression would not only backfire, it could cost him his career. A few tense minutes passed. Whitmore's hands trembled as he picked up Jamal's original loan documents again. Then, almost reluctantly, he began to flip through the paperwork, this time with genuine attention. Jamal observed quietly, letting the manager's discomfort simmer. Every financial projection, every note about federal protections, every record of Jamal's impeccable history weighed on Whitmore like a scale of justice. Finally, Whitmore set the papers down with a sigh. "Mr. Hayes. I will approve your loan," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. It wasn't a proud moment, it was a moment of reluctant submission. Jamal nodded politely. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate your fairness." Whitmore tried to muster a smirk, but it failed. Jamal turned to leave, already knowing that this small victory was only the beginning. Outside the office, the tellers and receptionist exchanged relieved glances. The story of the black farmer who had stood up to the arrogant bank manager was spreading quietly but surely through the town. But Jamal didn't stop there. Once he returned home, he contacted the bank's regional office to provide a full account of Whitmore's behavior. He presented evidence of the harassment and the manager's condescending attitude. It wasn't about revenge, it was about accountability. Whitmore had abused his power, and someone needed to make sure such behavior didn't continue. Within a week, the call from the regional office came. Whitmore was placed on immediate suspension pending investigation. The investigators were meticulous, reviewing Jamal's evidence and interviewing employees. Every detail Jamal had documented matched what the staff had witnessed. Whitmore's arrogance, his treatment of Jamal, and his unprofessional behavior were all laid bare. Jamal continued his work on the farm, tending to the fields and planning for the expansion now made possible with the approved loan. He didn't gloat, he simply continued living by the principles that had guided him all his life: hard work, integrity, and respect for the law. Yet, in the back of his mind, he knew that the day of reckoning for Whitmore was coming, and this time, it. By the time the regional investigators arrived at the bank, Jamal had already returned to the rhythm of farm life. The sun rose over his fields, the corn swaying gently in the morning breeze, and the animals greeted him as they always had. He found a strange comfort in this normalcy, knowing that while he had confronted injustice in the office, life on the farm was still rooted in the things he loved: soil, growth, and the quiet satisfaction of work well done. Meanwhile, at the bank, Whitmore's world had begun to unravel. The investigators were thorough and unyielding. They spoke to each employee individually, documenting every word about the incident with Jamal Hayes. Teller after teller described the scene: how Whitmore had thrown Jamal's papers on the floor, the condescending remarks, and the visible discomfort he caused throughout the office. Whitmore tried to defend himself, claiming that he had only been joking or testing Jamal's patience, but the evidence was overwhelming. Even the surveillance footage corroborated Jamal's account. The regional manager, a no-nonsense woman named Denise Carter, reviewed the file with a steely gaze. "This is unacceptable," she said firmly. "Professional conduct is mandatory. Personal bias, harassment, and intimidation have no place in this institution. Mr. Whitmore will be terminated effective immediately." Whitmore, sitting in her office, went pale. He tried to argue, to rationalize, even to beg for a second chance, but it was useless. The board had reviewed his history and the complaint, and there was no way to mitigate the damage. In that moment, he realized that his arrogance, his attempts to belittle and intimidate, and his underestimation of Jamal Hayes had cost him everything. Back on the farm, Jamal was finishing his lunch when his phone rang. He answered, expecting perhaps a casual call from a friend. Instead, it was Denise Carter herself. "Mr. Hayes, this is Denise Carter from the regional office. I wanted to personally inform you that Mr. Whitmore has been terminated. Your complaint was fully investigated, and we agree that his actions were completely unacceptable." Jamal felt a wave of satisfaction but kept his voice calm. "Thank you, Ms. Carter. I appreciate the integrity with which you handled this situation. You stood your ground, Mr. Hayes," she said. "Many people wouldn't have. You were professional, thorough, and fair. That made all the difference." Hanging up, Jamal looked out over his land. The corn glistened in the sun, the animals grazed peacefully, and the sense of justice that had finally been served filled him with a quiet pride. He had not only secured the loan to expand his farm but also ensured that the man who had disrespected him would no longer have the power to humiliate others. News of the incident and Whitmore's termination spread through the town like wildfire. Local newspapers picked up the story, highlighting the courage and integrity of a farmer who refused to be intimidated. Interviews with Jamal portrayed him as calm, diligent, and unwavering in his principles. The town celebrated him, not as someone seeking revenge, but as someone demanding fairness and standing up for what was right. Whitmore, on the other hand, became a cautionary tale. Former colleagues spoke in hushed tones about how quickly arrogance could lead to downfall. His reputation was irreparably damaged, and he faced the humiliation of explaining his termination to friends and family. The man who had once thrown papers on the floor to assert his dominance now faced the consequences of underestimating a man who simply demanded respect. Jamal's farm flourished in the months that followed. With the approved loan, he installed new irrigation systems, purchased modern equipment, and expanded his crop field significantly. The harvest that year was one of the most successful in his family's history, attracting buyers from surrounding counties. He even hired additional staff, creating jobs for people in his community, and sharing the prosperity that had once been threatened by a single arrogant manager. Yet, through all this success, Jamal never let the incident make him bitter. Instead, it reinforced his belief in perseverance, knowledge, and dignity. He often reflected on the bank encounter, not with anger, but as a lesson in how patience and preparation could overcome prejudice and arrogance. One crisp autumn morning, as Jamal walked through his fields checking on the crops, a neighbor approached him. "Jamal, I heard what happened at the bank," the man said. "I just want to say, you handled that with more class than most people ever could. You didn't just get your loan, you taught everyone a lesson about respect." Jamal smiled, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Thank you. I didn't do it for a lesson. I just did what I felt was right. But if someone learned from it, that's a good thing." As he returned to his work, Jamal noticed something remarkable: the community around him had changed subtly. People treated each other with more patience, respect, and fairness. Whitmore's removal had become a symbol of accountability, and Jamal's actions had inspired others to stand firm in the face of injustice. Months later, the bank contacted Jamal again, not for complaints, but to offer him a new line of credit and business advisory support. They had recognized his reliability, integrity, and the growth of his farm as exemplary. Jamal accepted the offer cautiously, knowing that this time the relationship would be based on mutual respect rather than intimidation. And so, Jamal Hayes continued to cultivate not only his land but also the values that had carried him through life: hard work, honesty, and courage. The humiliation he endured that day in the bank had been transformed into empowerment, a story that inspired his community, improved his farm, and brought justice to someone who had thought himself untouchable. In the end, Jamal realized that true strength wasn't about retaliation. It was about standing tall, knowing your worth, and letting integrity and patience turn the tables on arrogance. The bank manager who had once tried to demean him had been removed from power, and Jamal had gained not only financial support but the lasting respect of his peers. As the sun set over his fields, Jamal paused, breathing in the crisp evening air. He smiled quietly, knowing that life on the farm, and justice in the world, had a way of balancing itself out. The soil he tilled, the crops he nurtured, and the dignity he maintained had proven stronger than arrogance, prejudice, or intimidation. And in that moment, Jamal Hayes understood that true victory was not in forcing someone down, but in rising above them.